Should we be considering sending British troops to Ukraine? I would love to get your calls on this. 0207 862 2222 is the number. It's on the front page of the Telegraph this morning. The Prime Minister has said he's ready and willing to put British boots on the ground to enforce any potential peace deal that is reached between Ukraine and Russia. It's the first time he's explicitly said he's considering deploying peacekeepers to the region. His comments come ahead of an emergency summit of European leaders in Paris today, called by Emmanuel Macron. That's after it emerged that they'd not been invited to early peace talks between the US and Russia. Senior members of Trump's administration are meeting with Russia's foreign ministers in Saudi Arabia today. This is US Secretary of State Marco Rubio landing in the last hour. Ukraine are notably absent. Apparently, they've not been invited to negotiations at this stage. Keir Starmer, over here, has said we'll play a leading role in keeping the peace, including ongoing financial support for Ukraine's military. My question is, do you want to see us involved in that way? Is it the beginning of something that maybe we wouldn't want to be involved in? Or is it helping to keep the peace in something that's not that far away from us, Lynn? Ukraine is, very close. A close neighbour, really.
No. We have already done enough for Ukraine. Despite on our own doorstep, we are suffering in Britain. We have pledged 3 billion every year. We've already sent 66 billion to Ukraine. We've accepted over 250,000 refugees coming in from that war. We continue to train their personnel, their military already there. We have sent troops in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, wars that should have never happened previously. Commentators on defence has said multiple times the state that we're in now, we wouldn't last even 6 months with boots on the ground. We refuse to increase our defence from 2.5, and we do not have the appetite to continuously be involved in wars. If we do have a fear, which many people say, of a NATO member being attacked, it will trigger Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, where we will all get involved and defend ourselves. We do not need to be involved at this point.
You say involved in wars. This is talking about, the way it's been described, as being involved in the peace, keeping the peace. And presumably as part, we wouldn't be on our own. We'd be part of a European force, as we've seen in the past in Europe, which is keeping the peace, a very fragile peace between a major nuclear power and a country that was invaded.
Britain always, with its imperialism, suggests it's peace. When has it ever been peace? Let's look at all the countries that we've been involved in. Was it left in a peaceful way? Was it left democratic? No. We need to concentrate on the British people and looking after our own. And as I've said before, I don't think people have the appetite to continuously see our taxes go on war. And as I said previously, if there is an issue with one of our NATO members being attacked, it will trigger Article 5, then we can get involved.
Okay.
None of our members have been attacked as yet. We do not need to be involved.
Nick, how much is this about showing willingness to say to America, as much as anybody else, we are willing to invest in peace in that part of the world, and we are not going to stand by and just allow circumstances to take over.
Quite right. I mean, it's a messy business. It's a terrible business. But what we've got here is the fact that the leader of the free world has decided to withdraw to its own boundaries and let the rest of the world carry on as it wishes. This is a tragedy. Even though, I guess, way back in '62, Jack Kennedy said, it's very important that Europe steps up its ability to defend itself. And we haven't done that. So America's withdrawal actually leaves Europe in peril, frankly. Now, hold on. It's no good. And I know that they make some very trenchant points. But the point is that Ukraine, as a sovereign state, will be reabsorbed into Russia. There'll be a Russian stooge put in, and actually its sovereignty will just be absorbed by Russia, which is a terrible thing. And what we're really saying is that should we put some peacekeepers in to show that we in Europe, with the French and the Germans and anybody else, are prepared to stand as peacekeepers and monitor those, the border with Russia. And I think that we should.
Okay, I do want to bring in former chair of the Defence Select Committee and Lieutenant Colonel Tobias Ellwood. Tobias, good morning. What would a peacekeeping mission look like in the event that there is some kind of fragile peace between Russia and Ukraine? What sort of force would it be?
These are the big questions that we need to ask ourselves. If I may just respond to what's just been said in the studio already, I'm afraid there is a 1938 feel to the world right now. We are appeasing an aggressor, hoping to avoid further war, but only, in my view, allowing the bully to take advantage of our timidity and pursue adventurism elsewhere. So we may not want war, and certainly we've been scarred by the outcomes of Iraq and Afghanistan. Absolutely right. But conflict will soon come to us. Indeed, it's here already in the form of a grey zone warfare. We are being attacked daily by Russia, but striking a deal that we're not even part of with Russia over Ukraine will simply allow Putin the space to rearm, regroup, and fight another day. So I'm pleased, even though we're not part of that decision-making in Saudi Arabia, that Britain is looking to step forward. But we need to understand the terms of those deals that will actually have huge impact in what a peacekeeping force might look like. Many logistical questions this now opens up. It's not just about boots on the ground, but it's also about the top cover, the air cover. What would be the RAF's involvement? And then there's the maritime component as well. There's the Black Sea to consider too. Those rules of engagement are critical to avoid any escalation. If you end up us against Russian forces, what would be the size and duration of this operation? And this poses even further questions about the size and scale of our own armed force, because we simply could not sustain a brigade strength for any length of time because our army, our forces are now too small. And this does focus on peacekeeping as a whole, but overshadows the bigger concerns about our relationship with the United States as Europe and Ukraine is sidelined. I've just come back from the Munich Security Conference, and it's clear that America is dialing back more generally from European security interests. And the space that Putin is now being given, if a deal is made to be able to do this all over again, is absolutely huge. I saw a paradigm shift, I stress this, in US thinking in Munich, game-changing in its geostrategic relationship with Europe. And that is, for Britain and our allies, we must come to terms with. What is the future of NATO as America focuses on other parts of the world? We must realize that Europe is increasingly on its own and is looking increasingly vulnerable as Putin now grows in strength and is the most powerful leader in Europe. There is certainly a security leadership role for the UK to play, but ultimately we can only do that if we invest far more in defense.
Well, what do you say, to Trump's narrative that the cause of the war was essentially suggesting that Ukraine could join NATO, and that should have never happened? And for people who say, well, why can't a sovereign state join NATO? Well, for the same reasons why the US would never allow missiles to be, in Cuba, for the same reason why we will not allow certain countries to have nuclear deterrence. So what would you say to Trump's new narrative now, that it was actually Ukraine and Biden instigating this war?
I'm sorry, but that's a false narrative. We shouldn't even entertain that idea that somehow the expansion of NATO caused the war itself. It certainly wasn't a factor that made Putin feel threatened, but ultimately it was his tanks that marched into a democratic state in Europe. And it's his tanks that will march elsewhere in Europe, whether it's inside of NATO or continue their grey zone warfare, impacting Europe's security, impacting Europe's economy as well, which oddly enough will have a knock-on impact on America as well. So let's not look back and say, oh, it's the expansion of NATO that caused this. This was a tyrant. This was a dictator invading another state and causing a war, the likes of which we've not seen since 1945.
Tobias, thank you so much for joining us this morning. After the break, we are going to be carrying on with this subject, taking your calls. Should we send British troops to Ukraine? 0207 862 2222 is the number. We'll see you very shortly. We're going to take a call straight away from James, who's in Midlothian. James, if we manage to achieve some sort of peace in Ukraine, should we be there, boots on the ground? What do you think?
Certainly not at the moment. We're not invited to the table. There's no European representation at the table. It's scary to think he makes that statement without knowing the infrastructure that will be there and the amount of money it will cost. Secondly, Labour Party, to me, are very crazy. They need to concentrate in Britain, United Kingdom. Especially, I think there'll be probably less potholes in Ukraine than what's in Britain at the moment. The National Health Service is a disgrace. The heating allowance was stopped. The price of petrol's up. And he's wanting to put troops into Ukraine. One other thing is, this last time any Labour Party or government got involved in this, Bush and Blair, look what happened there. It's absolute carnage.
James,
so we don't want to be involved in this.
James, the point that Tobias Ellwood was making was that the war that is in Europe today is the war that's in our backyard, that we pay the price for in one way or another further down the line. And we've already taken in, as Lynn was saying, we've taken in thousands of Ukrainian refugees. We've done that bit. Aren't we asking for worse, more of the same and worse, if we don't put boots on the ground and take a part in peace, keeping that peace, and really deterring Vladimir Putin from looking at places like Poland and Lithuania as well?
Right. See what you're saying, right? I hope you understand politics. America and Britain helping them destabilise the Russian state, right? But Ukraine was part of it at that time, and that's when they had all these different governments emerging through destabilisation of the Americans. Now we're back to there again, because he wants to be in a situation, I've done this, I've done that, without informing anybody. This would never have happened if we hadn't allowed America to destabilise half the world. And that's the problem. And Mr. Ellwood's fine. I don't really listen to what he's saying, because if he thinks us or NATO's trying to take over, there's got to be any good, he's kidding himself on.
OK. James, thank you very much for your call. Lynn, this is one part that I don't understand. Trump claims to be America first, that he is effectively going to concentrate on the US. And yet one of the very first things he does is mess in foreign policy, which he has very little experience in. He's messing with, as Tobias described him, a tyrant. Those two messages seem to really conflict with each other. They contradict each other.
Well, I think the West is a walking contradiction when we look at foreign policy. We call people like Putin aggressors. We're happy to see, or standing by watching Trump say that he will allow or support Israel taking the entirety of Gaza, displacing almost 2 million people there. However, when it comes to Putin, he's the worst thing in the world. I don't see Russia or any other country having over 700 military bases all over the world, destabilising multiple countries. The caller was right. We talk about democracy, but where we have left certain countries in the name of peace, they haven't been left peaceful. And I think the British people are absolutely sick to death of being involved in war. A recent poll with Gen Z said only 11% of young people would fight for Britain. So there isn't that thirst, there isn't that pride of being a hero running off to war with wives watching, waving. We're not interested. And I think unless it comes to our doorstep and it's absolutely necessary. We're an island. We're surrounded by water. There's Poland, Lithuania first. Putin doesn't want Britain. Let's stay out of it.
Nick?
Sometimes, one has to do the right thing. You just can't withdraw to your own boundaries and say, well, tough luck on Ukraine. Sometimes there's a need to actually stand up and do the right thing with your other European countries. As Ellwood, who's a great guy and frankly should have been leading the Tory party now, said, Putin wants to give Russia its majesty back, and you do that by regaining what was lost. And they lost Latvia, Estonia, they lost Poland, they lost Ukraine, and all the rest of it, and now they want it back. Listen, nobody said to the Ukrainian people, you've got a choice, you can look east and go and stick with Russia, or you can rather wisely look west and come to the West. They made the choice, and now the Russians didn't like it, and they're snatching their land back. And frankly, for our own purposes, and in order to protect the innocent and try and stabilise and control Russia, we should make an effort. Of course our army is weak, But with Germany and France and all the others, maybe we'll have some effect.
OK, let's take another call. Terry's in Hertfordshire. Terry, do you think we should be part of a peacekeeping force? Should we even consider going in alone if that's what it takes?
Good morning, all. What we've got to remember is that there was a pact made between the United States, the United Kingdom, and Russia
Yes.
to protect the sovereignty and the land borders of Ukraine when it was asked to give up all the nuclear capability that was stored in there when it was part of the USSR.
Yes.
And that was a treaty. They would give up all of that nuclear stuff. We would offer them the protection of everything that encompasses Ukraine. I'm afraid the young lady's got a very distorted view of what's going on in Ukraine. We have committed ourselves to protect Ukraine. And if that, at the end of the day, means boots on the ground, then so be it. And another thing is, I'm 86. I served in the army. And I've been around men all my life. And I do not believe that only 11% of young Britons would fight for this country.
I think you're out of touch, Terry. I think you're out of touch, Terry, because, you know, I consider myself still as a young person, and there is not an energy for it. Your time when you were in the army is different. There was a purpose and a feeling of being a hero. That feeling is no longer there. And with regards to me having a distorted view of Ukraine, there were agreements in place like the Minsk agreement that were not upheld either. Putin advised on multiple occasions, you are encroaching on my border. America or Britain would never allow a neighbouring state to encroach on its borders. So why should Putin allow that? Also, Ukraine made a surety that they would not join NATO. Why have they now said that they would?
Okay. Lynn, we're going to have to stop there. And thank you, Terry. We're going to take a quick break, but we are going to take more calls on this subject in just a moment. Remember, a peace deal is reached. Brian is in North Yorkshire. Brian, it's a big if, isn't it, if we reach some sort of peace deal? But would you want to see British troops keeping peace on that border?
I would not, and I'll explain why. I'm 85, I haven't long to live, I'm 85. But I'm bothered about the next generation. Now, Russia, we haven't got anything that Russia needs, not a thing. They've got their own gold, their own oil. So why do they want to have a conflict with Russia? Because within 3 hours, everybody in Britain would be dead.
Well,
we've become a base for defending America. And why aren't they sending troops to defend Palestinians? If it's that morally bothered about people killing people.
Well, the argument is, Brian, the argument that Nick was making was that if they're successful in Ukraine, what's to stop them working their way through Eastern Europe and reclaiming what they see as their own right that was lost to them as part of the Soviet Union?
The what?
The countries that were lost to them when they ceased to be the Soviet Union, that is about restoring pride as far as Vladimir Putin's concerned. That's what Nick was saying.
The reason he's attacked Ukraine is we've put him into a position where there were going to be nuclear weapons on his doorstep. America wouldn't stand for nuclear rockets on Cuba. So what's the difference? Double standards.
Yes.
OK, we're going to move on. Thank you, Brian. Anne's in Surrey. What do you think, Anne? Would you want to see British troops as part of a peacekeeping force in Ukraine?
Well, yes, it's the least that we can do because, as your previous caller, Terry, quite rightly said, there is something called the Budapest Memorandum of 1994, on which basis Ukraine gave up their nuclear arms, and they were the second largest country that had it. We and the US and Russia persuaded them to give it up. And in return, we guaranteed, it wasn't a gentleman's agreement, it was an absolute guarantee of sovereignty. So what are we now doing? We're turning around and saying basically what Putin said. Piece of paper, I'm ignoring it. You cannot draw back from an obligation that you made. So even if you don't like it, well, next time then don't get involved in any kind of contracts anywhere around the world, because no one will believe anything that the UK or the US signed if you just turn around the next day and say, yeah, well, that was then and I'm not going to honour it. And as far as NATO membership, incidentally, is concerned, NATO does not ask people to join. Countries ask NATO if they can join. It took Poland 11 years before they were allowed to become fully fledged members. And why did all these Eastern European countries ask to join NATO? Because they were scared to death, because they knew what their next door neighbor was likely to do. The war was not over. So if you talk incidentally about Putin wanting to reclaim the lands that he lost, he never had Poland in the first place. That was the Yalta Agreement, that was an agreement made over the heads of Poland, incidentally, that gave Stalin all the countries that he had now occupied and said, basically, you can keep them. That was a disgrace, and we're paying the price for it today.
Okay. Listen, thank you, Anne. Thanks for that call. Thanks for all our calls today.